Hi and welcome back. You're with Terry, and today I'm going to be working on this Japanese black pine in the fourth part of this four-part series on Japanese black pine from seed. So today I'm going to be repotting this tree. It's been in this container now for 2 years. So I suspect that I'm going to get a fair amount of coarse roots in this container. I need to cut those back so that I can generate or produce a more fibrous root system, which is going to be better in the long term, of course, because I want to fit this into a smaller container. A little bit of history on this tree. It was grown from I planted the seed, I believe it was 4 years ago. Then it was treated as a cutting. So I cut off the existing roots, re-rooted it with use of rooting hormone, and then planted it again. That was then planted into a pipe, a plastic pipe, quite a tall plastic pipe, and with a very coarse growing medium, and this produced these roots. I allowed the tree to grow in the plastic container for 2 years, which is in fact the only difference between this tree and the tree that I dealt with in the very first part. So this tree was inside the plastic pipe for 2 seasons, and that tree in the first that was featured in the first part was in the pipe for 1 season. So this one obviously, because the pipe then also had a container below it where the roots could escape into, the tree was fairly large before it was then attached to the rock. It's now been on this rock for, I believe it is 2 years, and so now it's already started to clasp the rock very nicely. Very happy with the progress, but onwards to the next step. Okay, because this was a cutting, you'll find that when you do cuttings of pines, you get lots of buds and subsequently branches growing down or growing very low on the trunk. As you can see, this is where the soil level would have been at one stage. And so these buds are proportionately very low on the trunk. If you don't do a cutting, typically you're going to find that budding will only start much higher up on the trunk. So this allows you to make very much smaller trees when you do cuttings, when the tree is still at the seedling stage. And so I have a tremendous amount of branches to choose from, to work with. So a lot of these branches are being used as sacrifices, or can also be used as sacrifices. At the moment it's just this one really that is being used or grown as a sacrifice, and what we're doing there is really just allowing this branch to extend outward, and the longer it gets, the more it's going to fatten up the portion of the trunk that is below it. So as I just mentioned, these sacrifice branches, the point is to allow them to extend as much as possible, and what I'm going to be doing now is just to remove these older needles which we don't need anymore. These would be, 2-year-old needles, and these are the needles from the previous season. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to cut off these branches on the side that are typical of pines, and focus the growth on the middle bud, so that this will continue extending. Now obviously again we have the same happening here. We've got 3 buds on the sides with 1 in the middle. I'm just going to leave this for now, and I will eliminate these later in the season. On this branch, this is possibly a branch that I'm going to use in the future. I'm not certain, but I've got buds close in to the trunk to work with, but I'm going to, just as I did with the other sacrifices, I'm going to remove these side branches and some of those needles. And this is just going to ensure that this extension, all of the energy is focused on extension. And also by removing these needles at this point, it's going to allow more sunlight into the tree. All right, now moving on to the next step, we're going to we need to remove it from the tree from the container. So you need to cut the wire holding the tree inside the container. I might be able to pull it through. Because this tree has grown in this container for the last 2 years, the roots are going to be quite compacted against the side walls. So I'm just using a root sickle to create a little bit of a gap, and this will make it easier to remove the tree from the container. So once you've created that gap, it now becomes easier to remove the tree from the container. So we can confirm that it's a good time, or that our timing is good for repotting. It's evidenced by these young new root tips, so it means that the tree is active. The health of the root ball can also be confirmed by a healthy amount of mycorrhiza. This is this white fungal looking like growth. This mycorrhiza is very important to the health of the tree. It dramatically increases the surface area through which roots of pines can take up nutrients. So if you have a sick pine, you probably will find that you don't have any mycorrhiza. And if you can then find somebody, maybe you know somebody in a bonsai club or somewhere that has pines as well, you can try and get some mycorrhiza from a healthy pine in their collection and inoculate your soil with it, and that will definitely help to strengthen the tree. When I did this planting originally and attached the roots to the rock, I used parafilm grafting tape. This is remnants of it. It perishes in UV light, or under UV light, and what's nice about it, as opposed to using it as a means to secure roots against a rock, to tie them in or bind them in, is that they are not going to, the material is very flexible, and so it's not going to create any wire bite marks on the roots themselves. And obviously, as I say, it perishes. And then what I think is of also great benefit is that usually when you're creating a root over rock, these roots would have been under the soil initially, and now you expose them. And then the traditional approach is to bury the entire planting in soil and then expose it. But by simply wrapping it with grafting tape, it keeps a humidity in here, so it keeps the roots moist, and that helps them to become sort of acclimatized to being exposed to sunlight or to atmosphere. And then eventually it perishes, and then of course allows the humidity inside that enclosure that you create is reduced. Before I start processing, in other words, exposing the roots on the tree, I'm going to prepare the pot so that once the roots are exposed, that they will be exposed for as short a time as possible. So if this can be done now, let's do it now. So we're just going to put some drainage mesh over the holes and put new tie-down wires on as well. All right, what you're going to do here is, using a piece of aluminium wire and the pliers, you're going to bend up a little U shape, and this is going to go into this space. It needs to be as tight as possible. You don't want the mesh to be moving around, and so the wire must fit in between in that hole to the circumference of the hole perfectly. And we're going to take our drainage mesh, and the drainage mesh is quite simply there to ensure that your media doesn't run or escape through the hole at the bottom of the container. Just cut the excess wire off, and now we're going to bend our tie-down wires. What I'm going to do is give that a nice 90-degree bend. This is good because it ensures that you don't have bends in the wire or sort of obstructions that will result in the wire preventing the container from laying flat on the surface of the bench. And then we just secure that on the top so that they out of the way when we fill it up with media, that the wires don't get lost inside the container. And now we can set that aside. Okay, so we're ready to proceed. Now I'm going to first cut off this mat of roots that would usually form on the bottom of the container. And this is typically what results in your tree being pushed out of the container. If you've ever noticed that, perhaps you've procrastinated on repotting for a couple of years. Here you can see very clearly the mycorrhizal growth. Too much mycorrhiza can also be a problem, in fact, because it tends to block up the spaces between particles and makes it difficult for water to drain through, and therefore for oxygen to get in. So too much mycorrhiza is not necessarily a good thing either. I'm just removing the outer face of the root ball. This would have been in contact with the container, so it's quite a compacted growth, and removing it just makes it a lot easier to go to the next step, which I will demonstrate to you now. Okay, if you're concerned about mycorrhiza, not having enough of it in the planting once you finish doing the repotting, you can keep a piece of root pad like this, and that has a lot of microbial growth on it, or mycorrhizal growth on it rather. All right, I'm using a dulled screwdriver, but you can use a chopstick or any other blunt implement. And this is now just working the root ball. So when I say working the root ball, I just mean removing the old growing medium. And although it looks like a very aggressive technique, my hand is firmly but gently, contradiction in terms there, the tool. And this means that if I hit a hard surface, like a thick root or something, that the tool will pop out of my hand. What you don't want to be doing is stabbing roots and damaging them. But you do need to work the root ball from the fringes or from the edges, and you work in a stabbing motion, and then you pull back slightly. If you meet any resistance, in other words, a root that is growing in a direction opposite to the way that you're working, then don't force it, because you're going to rip the root. Rather work around that area, and usually this motion of pulling towards you is effectively a teasing motion. So it's almost as if you were combing out hair on a person's head. You don't want to just go in one single motion, because then you'll break the hair. So that's the same thing with the root hairs effectively. So you don't want to force it. You want to slowly work the knots out. I just want to mention as well that when I did this planting, I used the parafilm grafting tape, as I mentioned already. But what's also important to do when you're creating the planting is that you need to wrap the roots underneath the rock. So you bring them over and across, and so that effectively you're going to be overlapping the roots like this at the bottom, and this just helps the tree to grasp the rock much better. Otherwise, it's very easy when you're doing work like this and you expose the roots a lot, that the rock can just slip out the bottom. So it's very important that you create those curves which grasp the underside of the rock as well. Okay, coarse roots, you need to cut those back. Use a pair of scissors that you don't use in the canopy of your tree, because this zone, the root zone, is very damaging or very harsh on bonsai tools. So have a pair of scissors that is dedicated to this task, preferably. You want to cut any downward facing roots as well, and keep those that are growing horizontally. Roots that are growing up those you can cut down or cut back as well. And then we may need to pin some of these roots down as well. Okay, so this is the root ball now finished. I've pruned the roots back. There's some of these roots, like this one, will need to be pegged down with some wire, and I'll show that to you in a moment. But the coarse roots have been pruned back, and also the underside has been reduced as well. That's important because you don't want this mass to become too big, because it makes it more challenging to fit it into a bonsai container, which is ultimately the goal, of course. So now we're going to go to the next step, which is to put the tree into back into the same container and fill it up with fresh growing media. So I'm using prepared growing media, equal parts of Akadama lava pumice with a little bit of agricultural carbon. This is ideal for this stage of development of this tree. It's generally known as the Boone mix, and it's just an overall mix ideal for conifers, really. So what you're looking at here is you want to make sure that you mound the soil in the middle. This will make sure that if you have any hollows underneath the base of the roots, that will be filled. So you press it down, and now you're going to wiggle it side to side, and you're looking to get planting depth that is level with the wall, the rim of the container. In this way, the water has equal chance to flow down close to the trunk as it does here. If it was mounded up, in my opinion, the tree starts looking like it's sitting on a bit of an island of sorts, and also the water is more likely to run down to the edges of the container and then down. Okay, once you've got the planting angle is correct and you've checked that from various angles, you now want to secure the tree with the wire, and this will just make sure that the tree is not going to get dislodged by some force, external force, the wind or a cat or a kid, somebody walking past. Okay, and you can see now that the tree is not moving in the container, it's very firm in there. Now, if you do need to reposition any roots, you can make yourself a little peg of sorts. So take 2 or 3 millimeter wire. You're going to put a little crook in it, and then find the root that you're wanting to bend or reposition, and then push down. And the length of the wire needs to essentially be long enough that it's not going to be moved around. And you have repositioned the root. Okay, I want to reposition this one again, so let me show you again. I want to put the wire on this side of it so it holds it back, and then this length of wire needs to be fairly long because the soil is quite loose, so it's very easy for it to move around at this point in time. So just push it in to the soil all the way down, and now it'll be wedged into position. Okay, last step on this now is just to fill up with growing media, and then I'm going to chopstick that in. So the purpose of this is to ensure that you have growing media in contact with all of the roots and that there are no air pockets in the roots. This is a very important step because roots will never grow into a cavity or into a void. So it's very important to take a little bit of time to ensure that you have filled up all the voids in the root ball. And it's quite easy to feel if there are air pockets because your chopstick goes in very easily. But when it's filled, you'll feel more and more resistance. Sometimes when the soil sinks away, just need to top it up a little bit and then carry on with the chopsticking, and then you'll see that 2 will sink into the soil or sink into the container until those voids are completely full. I'm using the spatula side of a rake combination tool. This is really just to tamp down and settle the growing media, and you'll find that it will sink down even a little bit further. You may need to top up the soil again, but the purpose of this is really just the same as the chopsticking. It's just to settle the media down, make sure that any voids are filled, so that roots can have an equal chance to grow everywhere. So as soon as I've done with this, I'm going to take the tree outside, give it a good and thorough watering. There will be dust that is created, there's just going to be dust. The growing media is completely dry, and so when you're working it like this with a chopstick and tamping it down, it does create a little bit of dust. So we want to wash that out of the container as much as possible. We don't want dust sitting in the system. And so when you water with as fine a spray as you possibly can, and water until the water running out of the drainage hole at the bottom of the container is clear. And then that will bring us to my summary on this tree. So just some closing remarks. For the amount of time that this tree has been in development, I'm very happy with the progress that's been made. And so for the season ahead, we're looking at just developing the trunk some more and starting to transfer the energy from the sacrificial trunk line into a new leader down inside the trunk. So that's going to take 2 seasons. It's never a good idea to just go in and cut it off. We need to transfer that energy over a period of time, and that is something that I will probably feature in videos to come. For now, the tree will go back out onto the bench, be protected from wind for the first few weeks, be in a very bright shade situation, and then I'll move it into full sun as soon as possible. Be using something called Kelpac, which is just a seaweed extract with cytokinins and auxins in it, to stimulate new root development, to stimulate foliage development, but it's not a fertilizer. And then after probably a month or so, when I see active growth occurring with the tree, so the tree is doing well, then I will start supplementing it with organic fertilizers. Okay, so obviously the tree is a root over rock. The future size that I envisage for the tree, finished size, would probably be in this sort of region around here. So we're probably another few years, good 5 to 10 years away from a nicely defined tree that I would be happy to put onto an exhibition. But yeah, for 4 years, this is great development. Thanks very much for joining me. So that was the 4th part in this 4-part series on growing Japanese black pine from seed. If you haven't watched the other 3 parts, please do so. I will link to that series now, and I hope to see you again in the future. If you haven't done so, please do like and subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, then you'll be notified when I upload new videos. It's usually every Friday afternoon. So until next time, take care and goodbye.